Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name's Ed Piscor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
Today, the man of the hour, Tower of Power, Joe Quesada. Jimmy, drop a book or two. Let's get right into things because the man's a busy dude over there at Marvel.
How about Ninjak, Exo Manowar Zero? Getting into Marvel time periods, we've got X Factor, Daredevil, Spider-Man. I mean, Marvel editor-in-chief for quite a run. So associated with some of the biggest characters there at Marvel Comics. And Joe Quesada, welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe.
Hey guys, how are you? Pleasure.
So, we get deep with the comic book talk, but I'm also kind of a video game head, man. Read the interviews and stuff before. I would love to get it on the record. Young teenage Joe Quesada, after the video game bust, works at FAO Schwartz, and a couple people from Nintendo of America come with a proposal to put out some consoles on consignment.
Yep.
How's that story play out, man?
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up because I was just contacted about 2 weeks ago, maybe three. It was prior to the Christmas holidays by a writer who's essentially a historian on the world of video games, and he's trying to find the connective tissue with my story and the Nintendo story, because that whole Nintendo story is very muddied and conflicted. And the idea that in Nintendo's records, the NES debuted at FAO Schwarz somewhere around October. My recollection is that a gentleman from Nintendo came and sold and wanted to sell these games to us on consignment somewhere around August, September, long before, because they eventually brought in a point of purchase display and all this sort of stuff. But that's not how my recollection of it started. So they were trying to find the connective tissue, and a lot of the people that were involved at the time are no longer with us, and so it's hard to. It's amazing to me though that Nintendo didn't really have, like at Marvel we could trace pretty much anything we've done, right, in the history of Marvel to a date and time and place and creator and stuff. Nintendo didn't have that at that point, right? Like even the idea of like when did Mario Brothers premiere, right? That's kind of under, they kind of know, but they're not 100% sure. So the story as I remember it was, I worked at the game department at FAO Schwarz, and this is after the bust of the video game world, and we were trying to push Atari cartridges out the door at 99 cents, and nobody was buying them. And this guy comes in and I guess he came and met with our manager. The manager comes down and he says, "Look, you're the games expert. You play all these games," which I did. I would take a game home like once or twice a week and try to learn how to play all the detailed Avalon Hill strategy games and all the new games that were coming in, so I could sell them. It was my job. So he said, "You're a gamer, right?" I'm like, at one point I was a gamer. And he's like, "Well, I got this guy. He's a really nice guy, and he's trying to sell us on a console system." Like, nobody wants console systems. And I'm nodding my head. Yeah, nobody wants. He's like, "Could you at least hear him out, see what he's got to say?" I'm like, "Sure." So the gentleman came down, and I think I know who it is, but I don't want to mention names because, again, I don't want to muddy up the work that's being done on the history of this thing. And maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but I don't think so. So he came down. He was really charming, and he was trying to sell me on the NES, with the gun and then the robot and the whole thing. And I'm like, "Dude, just nobody wants video games." And he's like, "I'll tell you what, take this home. Take it. It's my gift to you. Take it home, play with it, see what you think. I'll be back." I don't know if he was back the next day, a couple of days later, whatever it may be. But he wasn't from New York, right? He was from Seattle, and he had a history with Nintendo that went as far back as his time in Japan. And anyway, so I take this thing home, and I'm playing Duck Hunt, and I'm playing the system, and I'm like, "This is amazing. This is a game." The robot sucked. It just didn't work, right? I'm like, "This could be a game changer." But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I don't know how to sell this thing. I have no idea. So eventually we reunited, and he said, "What'd you think?" I'm like, it's crazy. It's fantastic, right? It's kind of, it's that next generation of video games that we kind of hope was coming after the Atari started presenting stuff. And we look at it now, right? It looks archaic. So we reunited, and I said, look, it's fantastic. This thing is a game changer. I can't sell it. I cannot sell it at all. So he said, look, I'll give you some units on consignment, and I'll give you a window of exclusivity where FAO Schwarz is the only place that has it. Okay, so I talked to the manager. I said, this is a no-lose proposition for us. It's just a matter of finding a little bit of floor space for it. So we agreed, and I remember building a display on the floor of, we had Trivial Pursuit that I would do this sort of artistic, geometric display on the floor in the game department, and so Trivial Pursuit was red hot. So I took down the Trivial Pursuit display and I put those on the wall, and I built the same display with the Nintendo boxes. And so it was right there for people to see as they came off the escalator, as they came through the door. So people walk in and go, what's that? Hey, it's a video game system. Pass. Literally, it was a hard pass, this constant hard pass. Finally, I had this gentleman come in. I remember he was dapper dude in his business suit and stuff. And he's like, I'm looking for something for my kid. And I said, how about this? And he's like, is that a video game system? Yeah. It's like, I don't know. So I said, I couldn't move these things. I just said, how about this? Take it, try it out, open the box, tear it apart. I don't care. If it doesn't work for you, just bring it back. I'll refund your money completely. Okay. So he took it with him, never brought it back. And then little by little, me and my buddies who were also salespeople in that department, we were selling those Nintendo units by word of mouth, one at a time, just like, hey, you got to like take us, take our word for it. So they started to move out slowly. And then I remember the change, and it happened pretty quickly, was we again, this is the archaic days of doing retail. So even though FAO Schwarz had this catalog, they did not have a separate warehouse somewhere in New Jersey that shipped out. So they didn't have a team of people on the phone that would handle these mail orders. And there was no internet, of course. So if you wanted something, if you called FAO Schwarz and you said, hey, I want this game, the operator would connect you to the games department. We would pick up the phone and we would take the phone order with the delivery instructions. And then that would be rung up and go downstairs, because downstairs was the stock group, and the stock group mailed everything out. So I remember I got a call and I picked it up, and it was this woman. She's like, I hear this is a new video game system. And I said, yeah, it's called the NES. And she's like, great, I'd like to order one. And I'm thinking, okay, so she lives in the city, and she's going to want, I'll just messenger. I said, so where would you like this messenger to? And she's like, oh, no, not a messenger. I live in Denver. I need this thing mailed. I was like, oh. And that's kind of when I knew that the shift had happened, like word of mouth had happened so quickly over this thing that some woman in Denver wanted this system for a kid. And then the rest of this stuff is history. And then they brought in the point of purchase display, and people would just loiter in the game department playing the games all day long, But it's sold like hotcakes. So that is my interpretation of the story. And they're still trying to qualify the fact that Nintendo gave us some units on consignment before putting up the big display.
It's a fascinating one, man.
It is. I wonder, if any of that.
I'm responsible for all you gamers. By the way, so two kickers to the story. So a little bit later, once we had the point of purchase display up, the same gentleman who sold me on the unit comes in one day, and he's like, psst. It was like a drug deal, right? It's like, psst, come over here. So I come over, I'm like, hey, how you doing? It's like, I'm going to give you something. No one has this yet, outside of people Nintendo. And he reaches into his coat pocket, again, like a drug, and he pulls out a gold cartridge. And I'm like, what is that? He's like, this is called Legends of Zelda. I'm going to give it to you before we put it on. Go home and play. And this is the reason I'm not a gamer, because I was living with my girlfriend at that time. I brought it home and I started playing it. And suddenly I was showing up late for work. That extended to not showing up to work at all. And my girlfriend worked at FAO Schwarz too. So she's like, what the, right? I'm like, you got to try this thing. So she started to play it. She started showing up for work with this, like, got to get rid of this thing. Got to get rid of this thing. And that was the extent of, that's one of the reasons why I didn't become a gamer, because I knew genetically I had that predisposition to like want that game right in my vein all the time, and I lost track of everything. And I knew it just was going to be counterproductive.
As a comic book drawer, I think that sort of sensibility is what cartoonists like imbue into their work day. Just being able to take that kind of manic, like that obsessive compulsive energy, and you can at least hedge and say that you're being productive with your time by sitting down at the page, pencil to paper, a page of comics comes out, you get paid, you pay your rent, your girlfriend is happy, you can take her on a date.
That's funny. I was going to ask how selling Nintendo, if any of that translates into today's world, and I feel like that kicker is kind of the translation, because I don't play video games unless it's job related, and it's for that reason. Like, what's the best case scenario? I love it, and now I become an addict and don't get any work done.
What I decided to do was that whenever I played video games or got involved in the video game system, it would only be a sports game, because there's a finite end to the game, right? And so there isn't a quest or anything like that. Put me on a quest and my OCD kicks in and I'm done. But the other thing that was important about that time in FAO, and actually I worked retail for a long time, was learning how to sell. I think inevitably led me to my role as editor-in-chief at Marvel, and finding ways and unique ways to sell our comics with this, this flowering new beautiful thing that we call social media that we all love, and has done nothing but improve our planet and our love for one another as human beings. But all those lessons, like selling that NES and saying, take my, because the other thing is, I also realized I couldn't sell something that I'm not a used car. Like if something's a piece of junk, I would just tell a customer, don't buy that. Really, don't buy it. Trust me, you don't want to, but you gain that level of trust with the customer, especially at FAO when we have regular customers come in, much like comic book folk coming into a store, and you're putting your reputation on the line, and hopefully they like what you like.
Those comic shop owners are usually happy to tell you not to buy this comic or that comic also.
That's true.
Well, yeah, but you know what? It's there. I've seen that work successfully, and also I've seen it work like counterproductive, where sometimes there'll be a comic book owner who tells his customers, don't buy that because it's Marvel and it's evil, right? That's his own personal comic book politics coming into play, as opposed to saying, okay, but if you like this book, here's a book in that genre that is just superior in quality to that one book that you like, right? So you're steering customers to stuff that you think, because that then drives your business, right? And like, this owner or this salesperson, they understand my taste, right? And then not every book is for everyone. So I've seen that happen in two ways. The smart owners, the smart salespeople in comic shops, they do that, right? They'll say, oh, you like genre A, here's something in genre A, could be by a different company, same company, different creator. And this is like, the pinnacle of pinnacles, so in that genre, as opposed to like, DC, those guys, or, it becomes a personal thing, and it's just,
that's that old school shit, man. Like where people are like, I'm a Marvel zombie, I'm a DC head. It was always funny to me. Like creators usually aren't that kind of guy.
But that's okay. I don't mind that kind of rivalry amongst fans, because even if you're a Marvel head, you're going to sneak in some DC stuff, but you're going to want to hear what's the good DC stuff, right? You like to, and vice versa. It's when it becomes a personal thing, like, Marvel's the big bad machinery. You don't want to support those guys, right? It's like, well, I understand that, but at the same time, if it's a product your customer may like, you should be selling stuff, even if you don't personally like the. I never understood filling your store with Marvel or DC stuff and not liking the company. What's the point if you're not looking to sell those books, right? So.
Yeah, that is an interesting thing. As Ed said, we've all had that experience of buying the wrong book and being told that we're buying the wrong book, and it's kind of like, who's this help? But still happens, or at least it used to happen.
making you feel stupid for writing, buying the wrong book.
Yeah, totally.
We're of the Image era, by the way. Like born in '82, so we were right there, man, grabbing the Youngbloods and the Spawns and all that stuff. So those old school shop owners were letting us know the deal. What you
Joe,
got?
before we cut into more present day, your role in comics these days, I'm kind of curious about your time at SVA. You graduated, I think, '84, and there's some interesting cartoonists that come out of SVA from the early '80s, and some interesting faculty that taught cartooning. I know you were illustration, but did you happen to interact with any of the cartooning courses, or Art Spiegelman, Will Eisner's, any of these?
Harvey Kurtzman?
I did. It's a tragic story, actually, because I read comics as a kid, right? And then I've told the story quite often, so I'll tell you guys. And right around the age of 12, I dropped them because I discovered two things that were much more important to me. And that was baseball and girls, and not necessarily in that order. So I dropped them, but I still loved to do artwork. And I still felt that comics were so instrumental in the expanding of my imagination and the realization that there are no limits, within your artwork. But I wanted to be, when I went to SVA, I wanted to be a illustrator in the grand sense of the Norman Rockwells and Maxwell Parishes and Alphonse Muchas, and telling a story in one image, right? In a beautifully illustrated image, conveying a feeling in one image. And by the time that I was in college, having not read comics since I was 12, my interpretation of comics was I was a smug a-hole. I looked down at them as just like, it's just a kid's medium. It's not anything that I want to be involved with. But as it might have been, I don't know what year it was in SVA, but I needed to take a few extra classes to fill my curriculum. And I saw that they had some comic book classes. And I'm like, well, what the hell, right? I don't necessarily need the credits, but I got to fill the curriculum. I'm going to take some cartooning classes. And I took Will Eisner's class and I took Harvey Kurtzman's class. And I failed them both. So
were you in there? Were you in there with guys like Drew Friedman? I'm trying to think of the years.
Drew was a year or two before me. So I had just missed him. I think he was still in the school when I was there as a freshman, but just a lowly freshman. So no, I just missed him. But I want to clarify that the reason I failed those classes was because really, I did work in those classes. I did some humor cartoons. I did some sequential stuff with Eisner. But at the end of the day, you had to hand in a final project in order to get a grade. And I could care less about comics at that time. So I just didn't hand it in. So I got a failure, a big fat F on that class. So, but the kicker again to that story is years later, I am now in San Diego Comic-Con and I'm a professional working artist. And I see Will Eisner there. I haven't seen him since college. And I stroll up to Will. It was a party. It might have been an Eisner party. I'm not sure. But it was a party. And I went up to him and I introduced myself. Hey, Mr. Eisner, how are you? I want you to know I took your class. And here I am. I'm a working professional. And thank you. And it's like, oh, cool. I don't remember you from my class. I'm like, well, that's because I failed it. And he got so angry. It was clear that he was not happy with the fact that I'd failed the class. But I made the effort to say hi, and so that's my final Will Eisner story.
So the channel was sort of built upon doing Wizard magazine reviews. That's how we got our first batch of followers. Man, the kind of nostalgia trip with that. And not a bad magazine for a good while. And we learned we learned some things about you, Joe Q. And one of the things that really fascinated me, and it's a question I always wanted to ask if we ever had this opportunity, very, very early on, you mentioned you had an agent for like illustration or getting gigs, and that kind of talk was just not done. Back in those days. So does that come from your kind of illustration practice, the idea of having somebody, juggle potential gigs? Like, what is that? It seems very forward thinking.
It was, I don't know, was it at the time? It probably comes more from my background in music, and having, having managers for my band and my career and stuff. But but yeah, I just thought, it was a prudent thing to do to try to get better deals and sell artwork and stuff. And it was just a product at the time. But I don't recall it as forward thinking. But thank you for the compliment. And by the way, Wizard magazine rocked. It really, really, really rocked. I mean, it brought such a joy of comics within those pages. I mean, it had its necessary evils that you kind of had to deal with in order to get some marketing and push for your stuff. But what trade periodical doesn't operate like that? But it was such a product of the time, and I don't think now in this internet world where news comes at you every 15 minutes. I don't think a magazine like that could possibly exist unless it was completely rethought and gave you added value that you can't get anywhere else. But it was awesome, man. It was awesome.
Did the agent help you get the first? We'll circle back to Nintendo by way of Valiant Comics and those like Game Boy, Super Mario comics and things, man. Is that something that your agent got you, or did you do any kind of other illustration work before you really started jumping into comics professionally?
The comics work happened by sheer happenstance. So I'll back up a little bit. So because it actually backs up right back to FAO Schwartz. After graduating from college, I did not pick up pencil and paper for around 4 years, maybe 5 years. I was so burned out. I had to. The only way I could equate it is that when very early on in my life, when I was in grammar school, like third grade, they identified, my school identified that I had a certain skill for drawing and creativity. So while I was in fourth or fifth grade, I was suddenly, going to the middle school to take art classes, right, with the older kids. And so it was a constant progression where, it's kind of like the kid learns how to play piano, and that's all they do until they finally just say, I'm done. I can't do it anymore. So my whole life, it was like, scholarships to the Brooklyn Museum of Art and taking advanced life drawing classes. I mean, I was a really little kid when I saw my first naked lady in a life drawing class. But they kept pushing me to do this. Not like I didn't want to do it, but by the time I graduated from SVA, I was completely burned out, and I was also madly in love with music, writing music, playing music, and just said that this is what I want to do, much to the chagrin of my dad, who really wanted me to be an illustrator. And to continue that sort of rock and roll existence, I would work crappy retail jobs, and so I ended up at FAO Schwartz, and there was a kid that worked in the stock room who would. And again, I was always kind of doodling on napkins. It was like, I just to kill time, just, those mindless sort of line doodles that you do. And every once in a while I do like a quick portrait of, salesperson in the stuffed animal department or whatever it may be. And there was a stock boy who worked in the basement, and he would, we'd bring up stock, and then he'd look over my shoulder and he'd see that I was doodling. And I was like, who's this weird kid? And then one day he just got up the nerve to say to me, he's like, those are really good drawings. I'm like, he's like, you should be drawing comics for a living. And I looked at him like, why? I just had this snobbish idea of what comics were. And I'm like, it's a kid's meeting. He's like, he's like, I'm going to get you something. I'll bring it back tomorrow. So the next day, there was a Forbidden Planet. One of their locations was right by FAO Schwartz. So he had gone to Forbidden Planet, he'd come back, and he handed me issue number 1 of Return of the Dark Knight. He said, read this. And I did. And the next morning I was just like, it's like I'd been to the mountaintop. So this story goes on where I go and I start collecting comics at this point, right? So now I'm hooked on comics because these are not the comics I remember as a little kid.
What kind of comics were you messing with, man? Like Grendel and stuff like that, or sticking with?
No. All right. So here's the full story. So I read Dark Knight. And I'm like, oh, what? So I go to Forbidden Planet. I'm broke, right? I'm working retail. Literally, I have no money. So I go to Forbidden Planet and I look and I'm like, whoa, comics have become expensive. Sound familiar, right? And I had literally had enough money to buy one book, if I recall, because it wasn't payday. So I looked at the comic rack, and this one book caught my eye, and I took it, I purchased it, I brought it home, I read it, and I'm like, wow, oh my God, what has happened to this industry? This is like the most, it's like reading movies on paper. And that happened to be Watchmen that I picked up. And I read it, and I didn't realize it was a second issue. And I'm like, oh, there's a first issue? So on payday, I ran over to Forbidden Planet, and I sort of budgeted. I said, okay, I have enough money, because damn, these things are expensive. I have enough money to buy 10 books. So I'm going to go and fall on my old favorites that I remember from childhood. I'm going to buy 5 Marvels, 5 DCs. Of course, amongst those 5 DCs, there was Watchmen #1, which I read and devoured with holy mackerel. And reading the two companies, also what became clear was, wait a minute, wait. Okay, this stuff is still pretty good, but this is nothing like Dark Knight and Watchmen, right? This stuff is like a whole other level. And it occurred to me that what I happened to just pick up by happenstance, or be given by happenstance, was the very creme of the creme of the best stuff that was being created at that moment. And everything else was sort of like the monthly, not terrible, but workaday stuff. And I also noticed the Marvel stuff, the stories were kind of weak, but the artwork was beautiful. And the DC stuff, there was more care taken to the writing, and the artwork was kind of like pedestrian, just your regular everyday superhero stuff. But I gravitated as an artist, though. You would think I would go towards the Marvel side of it, right, with all the cool artists they have. But instead, I wanted stories. I wanted to spend my money on stories that were going to take me to different places, and had structure to them. So that's kind of how I started reading comics, and that habit started to grow. And what I would do is I would once I read through my stack of books, I would make a stack of the stuff that I felt was exceptional. And then the other stack was just the regular everyday monthly stuff, right? And then, the same writers tended to appear in that exceptional, pile, right? There was the Frank Millers, the Neil Gaimans, Alan Moores. I mean, I had to go back and get Miracle Man, right? Because, oh my God, Howard Chaykin and Denny O'Neil and Archie. I mean, so the same quality writers started popping up there. And in my mind, because I've always role modeled, I started setting up in my head, I'm like, I think I want to try to get into this industry. Aside from music, I think I want to try, but I need to really educate myself first. And I really need to learn the language of comics, relearn the language of comics. So that's what I did, without really having any sort of plan of how am I going to get into this industry. So now I leave at Fair Shores, and I'm working in another retail location. It's like a lighting design store, and a guy comes in, and a really nice guy. We start chatting, and he just moved into a new studio apartment, and he has a floor plan. He's like, I'm looking for some cool lighting for my place. And I said, okay, leave it here, come back tomorrow, and I'll design something for you. So came back, as I'm looking at his floor plan, I noticed that there is he drew it himself, and there's a little block there that says drawing table, right? I'm like, oh, this guy's an artist. So he comes back the next day, we talk a little bit, and I'm like, all right, let me ask the question. You're an artist? He's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, cool. What do you do? He's like, I work in comic books. And my jaw, of course, drops to the floor. I'm like, really? Who do you work for? Marvel, DC? He's like, no, I'm working for this new startup called Valiant. I'm their art director. His name was Art Nichols. And I'm like, oh. I said, dude, I just started reading comics over the last few years, getting just excited about them again, and I really want to break in. Any advice? He's like, well, what do you do? I said, look, I'm an artist, and he said, well, why don't you bring your portfolio over to Valiant? I'll take a look at it. And I don't have any comic stuff. It's just fully painted illustration from several years back when I graduated college. I said, perfect. We're actually hiring painters to do coloring on comics. So I took my portfolio down to Valiant. They hired me on the spot as a colorist, and I started working there. And dropped. Never worked retail again. And slowly but surely, as comics started to become more and more successful for me, I become less and less interested in playing the push-pull game of the music industry. And that's kind of where everything started for me right then and there. And then there's, the story about getting laid off and all that other stuff. But that's really sort of the beginning. So there was no agent involved. It was just right person, right time, doors opening and just sort of taking the shot,
Did you learn a lot from working in that Valiant studio system for a little bit? Was Jim Shooter around? Were you able to pick the brains of some of these veterans?
Big storytelling guy, that Jim Shooter.
Jim Shooter was there. And I learned more from, I mean, Jim would hold court late at night, right? If it was late night we're working, he would tell some stories. But I learned more from the pencilers that came in, because that's ultimately what I didn't want to be a colorist. I wanted to be a penciler, right? And then, but I wanted to write my own stuff. I wanted to be, I wanted to be Frank Miller. I wanted to be an auteur. And so when pencilers would come in, again, as I mentioned, I role modeling is a big part of, I think, where I garnered whatever success I may have garnered in this industry. And that happens by asking questions of people who are in a situation where they have a particular, success story or a modicum of success. You're like, I want to be at that echelon, or I want to be the next echelon. But the questions I always ask, because the typical questions would be, tell me how you got your start. Tell me about, tell me about that story that you drew. And my questions would always be, tell me about where you screwed up, right? Tell me about where you stumbled. Because if you ask those questions, you'll be surprised that almost anybody who's successful is ready and willing to tell you their failures, right? Because it just amplifies how much struggle they had to go through to get to that level of success, right? So it's really a part of their origin story. And if you ask those questions and you listen very carefully, and you and take them as cautionary tales, inevitably the stories you hear are things that you may and most likely will confront at some point in your career. And if you're listening and you recognize, oh, I'm at that point that so and so is at, and they ran right into the edge of the edge of the blade, I know it's coming, so I'm just going to step a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left and avoid that. And even with building my portfolio, I was able to build a proper portfolio based on all the horror stories that these artists were telling me about portfolio reviews and how different companies handled each of their portfolio reviews. So I was able to hone my portfolio into something that was easily digestible and commercially, saleable. But that's really where I gained a ton of knowledge, was talking to those artists that came in, talking to Art Nichols, and just even that whole studio environment. I think there's a lot to be said for an actual bullpen environment. I think everybody elevates their game in time. I mean, for better or for worse, CrossGen did a very good job. No, listen, CrossGen did a very good job of creating a bullpen where young artists came in who had no real name recognition or weren't at a super, high level of time, and suddenly became high level artists because they were working with seasoned professionals who were also upping their game, right? To keep up with everybody. And there was, it's, I don't even know if it's used as competition, but there's just this group atmosphere where like, we're all going to get better, right? I'm looking over yours. As long as everybody's collaborative and willing to share, I think there's so much to say about that kind of a working environment for creatives.
I feel like a lot of cartoonists, artists, visually oriented, man. So you like learn by seeing. Right. If I see you do a demo, I might be able to do that feathering line. The Valiant bullpen. Nah, bro. You remember that shit, dude?
And by the way, I have to say that when they called us knobs, I found that so ridiculously demeaning, because the reason, why they called us knobs, right? Because you could tweak this person a little this way, tweak this little person a little bit this way, and it just, but it wasn't said with love and concern. It was really more, So it was. I hated that term.
Yeah, we didn't read it with love and.
I just you never know. I mean, but it was a bullpen. It was a bullpen, and we had people like Janet Jackson who were teaching us color theory, for comics. It was a great environment from that point of view, and just a bunch of loser artists just hanging out and trying to make the best of it.
Did you ever have Steve Ditko pop in Do you have a personal Steve Ditko story?
I do not. I've never met Steve.
Did Valiant change, Joe? Because you were there very early in their run, and then you come back, I don't know, a couple of years later. Did you notice a big difference there, post Jim Shooter or something?
Oh, of course. We were only doing Nintendo comics when I was there. So we were doing Nintendo comics. And again, I was there. I was still a young dude, but I came with the modicum of some business sense. Not a lot, but some. And they were paying colorists. Okay, so it's fully painted coloring on these Nintendo pages. They wanted to have like a unique look for these books. And instead of paying colorists by the page, they were paying us by the hour. All right. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two, this is 1989 maybe, and they were paying us $14 an hour in 1989. That is an exorbitant amount of money for a bunch of young guys and gals that are just sitting there. So, but again, I was cranking through about 4 pages a day because, I still came with sort of this business sense that this stuff's got to get done. My buddies who were sitting across from me, and they were taking like 2 or 3 days on a page. And I remember having lunch. We all went to lunch at the Cadillac Bar, which no longer exists. It was like a block away from the office. And I said, guys, I was the oldest person in that group. They were all just out of college. So I'd already been out of college and faced a little bit of the real world. I sat there and said, folks, this is unsustainable, right? Are you putting your money away? Put your money away, because these books are not selling and they're paying us $14 an hour. And some of these books aren't even getting done on a timely basis. Save your money. And I was like probably 4 months into my gig at Valiant, and elevator door opens and like 4 guys, or I don't know, it was 4, but gentlemen in business suits with briefcases walk in. And they immediately go into the conference room, and I see the president of Valiant go into the conference room, and I see Jim Shooter go into the conference room, and I'm like, this is not good. And it turned out that those were the investors. And they had some big meeting, and it wasn't too long after that Shooter called for a staff meeting. Everybody, right? All hands on deck in the conference room, and we're all sitting there, and he announces that 3/4 of the staff has to get laid off because they're just spending money inappropriately and blah, blah, blah. And, he said, sorry, but last person in, first person out. So, being one of the relatively new employees, I was let go on the spot. But I got it. I understood, it was out of my control. And at the same time, it's business. So, $14 an hour coloring. The colors were probably making more money than the pencilers were on the page by the time they got done with those pages.
It's always funny, like just thinking about like those companies and the amount of capital involved, and how they put on their power suits, pull back their ponytails, and go get these guys to put in a couple $1 million into a kitty. And then when you reverse engineer like what it takes to put a comic book together, publish a thing for $2,000, like maybe double that, triple that for the creative talents involved. Like, it's not that much.
Right. It's once you start buying like the overhead,
the office building,
exactly,
the building with the elevator,
to have that bullpen, the roof above the bullpen is where you start to get into some money.
Yeah, but understand also that those books were licensed, right? So Nintendo was getting their cut of it, and the superhero universe hadn't started yet. And that's my one big recollection of Shooter was the art space, the office space at Valiant was essentially a classic loft, right? So it was this sort of railroady, wasn't quite a rail, but it was definitely, it was definitely a, well, I don't know, longer on one side than was wider. So I'll call it a railroady kind of space. At the very end of one space near the elevators, it was a big wooden desk. And that's where Shooter sat, right? Shooter sat, like he was, like the king would sit, right, in his kingdom. And he would always have his feet up on this desk and a legal pad. And he was constantly writing stuff. And he'd stick up his head every once in a while and say, hey, how you doing? But he was just writing. And I'm sitting there going, what is this dude writing? what he was writing was the beginning of the Valiant universe. He was taking all those characters and the connectivity and the licensed characters that we're going to have, like Magnus and Solar, and he was just brainstorming it all on that legal pad all by himself. So I'm sure the investors came in and said, when are we getting this stuff, right? And that's, so I get laid off, and eventually I end up working in comics, and then shortly after that, or you start seeing the beginnings of the Valiant universe start to bubble up. And as a reader, I was finding a lot of that stuff really, really exciting, because it had the energy, the superhero energy of Marvel, but they were striving for the writing quality of DC at the time. So, when I started talking to them about doing projects for them, it felt like coming home, but it also felt like I was landing in some place that was really doing something innovative. But like, all things, the money people come in, things change. And, if depending on what your goals are, if your goals are just to build it and get bought out, it doesn't necessarily enhance the creativity. But if you're looking for the long haul and create something really substantial, that would have been really cool. It would have been interesting to see where the Valiant universe ended up, truly.
Part of going through Wizard, it was an interesting revelation, kind of how small that Valiant window was. It's my memory of it is it lasted a long time, but you go back and see, and it's like it's a pretty small window whenever they're really clicking and kind of at their best.
Yeah, once Shooter got jettisoned, and then eventually it just became about. Again, a lot of this is from the outside looking in, right? So I can't tell you this is incontroversially this is exactly what's happening, but it started to feel like, okay, they're building up the IP just to sell the whole darn thing. And once they sell the whole darn thing, depending on who's left to run the creative, it's either going to continue or it's not. Eventually, it just sort of, I think they got ahead of their skis.
So. Early 90s there, you've done work at DC with Azrael, you've done work at Marvel with X Factor, you've done work at Valiant with Ninjak, and eventually you decide to start self-publishing with Event and Ash. Right. And it's kind of like when the comics market is imploding, that getting into the mid-90s. What was that time period like, and were you like having second thoughts on self-publishing? What do you remember from that implosion?
I remember Jimmy and I having this conversation. Should we be starting a company right now when it's possibly the worst climate in the history of comics to start a company? I remember just telling Jimmy, I don't know, I can't think of a better time. I don't know what I was saying or talking about. It just sounded like the right thing to say. But it ended up working out for us in a lot of respects. We had the opportunity, after the Image guys exploded onto the scene with Image, then they were looking for Wave 2 talent, right? But Wave 2 talent, it wasn't like, hey, Wave 2, like you could come in and start your own thing. It was more like, hey, I need somebody to draw my books for me. So I want to poach top talent here, top talent there. And they were offering astronomical page rates to do this thing, and I had gotten a call to see if I was interested, and that would have involved Jimmy as well, of course, because he was my anchor. And my thought at the time was, if I do this, my career will take a path where I'll be known as, let's say it was Jim. I'm not going to say who, but right, I'll be known as Jim Lee's guy, right? Or I'll be known as Todd McFarlane's guy. I won't be known as myself. So Jimmy and I talked this out, and I said, I'm going to turn it down. I'm going to turn down, because it was big money real fast. And again, through the role modeling I've done, for myself over the years, I always wanted to take the longer, more sustained path, right? The one that may be harder to manage through, but will lead to a more sustained career. I said, let's be our own people. We started talking about Event at a point where we were still on good terms with Valiant, and we met with Bob Layton and the team there, and we said, we got this character Ash, and we love working at Valiant, and we'd like to do a co-publishing venture where Ash exists in the Valiant universe, And, we understand, Valiant will own a piece, but, we'll own a piece as well. And we think it's got legs and, it could be a good movie property. And they were like, yeah, awesome. And then literally overnight, they were like, nope, we're not going to do it. And that was the point where Jimmy and I were like, we're going to publish this ourselves. We're going to start our own company. Let's just do it. Right. And that's when the industry started imploding. And, it was literally every month watching sales go down and down. And I remember being up at the Marvel offices and seeing, the business heads panicking about stuff, saying, well, this is clearly rock bottom. And then the next month would come in and it'd be even worse. It's like, oh my God, where is rock bottom? But yeah, so there was the offering of Ash to Valiant. They're turning it down, and then us saying, screw it, let's do our own thing, but again, the calls from Image had come, and just said, that the long-term money was better than the quick.
So what were the event books? You had Ash, Painkiller Jane,
Kid Death and Fluffy,
yes.
22 Brides.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And you said could be a good movie property. Was that a little bit of inspiration, like to sort of create
for
IP?
Ash? For Ash, no. We just had the IP. We liked the idea, and we thought, wow, this could be something, right? And then it did get optioned, and it didn't get made, but it got optioned. But it wasn't constructed to be a play for Hollywood. The actual, when we got that call from Hollywood, it literally came out of nowhere. We were not expecting. I mean, we had two issues published. I believe 2 issues at that time. Maybe it was more, but it between 2 and 4, we're like, whoa. And that was, again, very, very unexpected at the time.
Would this be an era where you're kind of commiserating with Caliber Comics dude like Brian Michael Bendis, who has his Hollywood, cup of coffee or whatever at that time also?
No, I did not know Brian until I was editor-in-chief.
I see.
Actually, that's not true. I didn't know Brian until just I become an editor-in-chief. Yes. Yeah. So I did not ever run into Brian. I did know David Mack, but who, was obviously tied with Brian, but he never introduced me to Brian until I was editor-in-chief.
Yeah, I wish somebody would do a Caliber history, because there's so much talent that comes through that. And talk about a company that's not mentioned once in Wizard Magazine for some reason. And yet you have the David Macks and the Bendises and O'Barr and all these guys coming out of there. It's like the little company that could. Joe, from there, I correct me if I'm wrong, but you sort of get into Marvel Knights from Event. Is that about the right timeline?
Yeah. It was in probably late 1997, early 1998, around there. That we get approached by Marvel to create an imprint for them.
And what's the deal? It's like you have some do they look at your administrative talents by publishing Event Comics, and they're like, hey, we're going to give you a couple titles. How does something like that go down? It
went down again through one of the things, Event Comics. We had no money. We had no money for a marketing budget, but we had ourselves, and we knew how to throw awesome parties, and we had a bar in New York that basically loved us and would give us carte blanche to do whatever we wanted, much to the point where people thought we owned the bar. So we would throw these outrageous parties, right? Parties that you couldn't possibly throw today. Maybe you could, but and so that would get us, it was guerrilla marketing, and that would, and of course, folks from Wizard would come to the parties because they heard they were cool. Folks from Combo Magazine would show. I mean, all the comic book press would come. Editors from Marvel, editors from DC. It was just sort of a way for us to schmooze, and these were all friends. We really liked these folks, right? So it was a good time. The comic book industry was really centered.
If you love comics and want to support Cartoonist Kayfabe, buy our books. Red Room, the antisocial network, collects Ed's first 4 issues of the modern outlaw comic Red Room, Murder on the Dark Web, for fun and profit. This is available now wherever books are sold, including your local comic book shop. You can request it if it's not already on their shelf. 4 great issues of comics and art, and a lot of great back matter, including this first written draft of Red Room, some notes from Ed on the making of this book. Starting in March, trigger warnings. The second season of Red Room will begin, And this is the cover to look for whenever you go to your local comic shop in March looking for Red Room. If you haven't already had that added to your subscription box, look for this cover on the shelves March 9th. These are the variants that are available for Red Room. A second variant here by Ed Piskor. Peach Momoko, The Cottage Industry, and my homage to Robert Crumb's Zap Comics. These will all be available at your better comic book shops starting in March. And if you can't wait until March, you can join Ed on Patreon to read Red Room comics ahead of time, dropping every Tuesday. $3 gets you the archive there, and that link is in the link tree below this video. My next comics project, Hulk Grand Design Monster, will be hitting comic shops in March. This is what I did for lockdown, Ed. I locked myself in a room for a year with 500 issues of The Incredible Hulk, and I distilled the Hulk's story, the first 40 years of the Hulk, into 2 standalone issues, Hulk Grand Design Monster, Hulk Grand Design Madness. These will be coming out in March and April 2022. Tell your local comic shops you want a copy to pre-order a copy for you to put it in your pull box. And issue number 1 Monster has some great variants, including this gem from Ed, Peach Momoko doing her take on She-Hulk, and Marcos Martin with the classic Hulk transformation from meek Bruce Banner into the Incredible Hulk there. These are not retailer incentives, which means if you like one of these covers better than my cover, tell your local comic shop that you want it and they can pull that for you at no extra price, but you got to let them know ahead of time. So let those comic shop knows what you want for Hulk Grand Design right now. And now back to our regular scheduled program.
Here's where we left off. You and Jimmy Palmiotti are the 2 guys in the comic book industry who have some social skills. So you put together really fly parties at a bar. That these other guys come to, and you know, like with this in mind, this is mentioned a little bit in that Sean Howe Marvel Untold Stories book, and I wonder if you agree with his interpretation of events, that he basically says in that book that you guys are connected with Wizard, you guys are connected in some tangential way with some Hollywood peeps, and Marvel wants some of that. So where do you stand?
Yeah, I mean, our connection to Hollywood was pretty linear with just DreamWorks. I mean, DreamWorks optioned Ash, and that was it. That's our whole connection to Hollywood. But we were connected to Wizard and to every trade periodical, and became friends with reporters there and stuff. And listen, while we couldn't afford to take out ads in Wizard, we would at least get press because folks wanted to promote us because they liked us or they saw something in what our product was, and the fact that we cared about what we were doing. It wasn't. Yes, we wanted to make money, but it wasn't a gross money grab, right? If I wanted a money grab, I would have gone to work for other companies. But through those connections in Wizard, Joe Calamari, who was the president of Marvel at the time, yes, and we did call him Joey Squid. So Joey Squid, wonderful man. And he was the president of Marvel at the time, and he was very good friends with Gareth Sheamus. And so he asked Gary, he said, listen, I need an infusion. I need an injection of something, right? We're not getting out of this rut that we're in. And who do you know? And so Gary made a few suggestions, and he suggested Jimmy and I. He's like, because of the fact that we're just able to market on just sheer energy and buybacks and just hanging out and taking the time to talk to creators and become friends with creators. And being a part of that scene. And so Joe called us in for a meeting. We had dinner, and he essentially talked to us about what would we want to do at Marvel, what would it take. So it was a very sort of surface meeting, just batting ideas back and forth, and him asking us, what do we think Marvel needs? How do we think Marvel can improve? So we left that meeting knowing that we were going to get together again and discuss what the deal was, what we thought we could do. So the second dinner was scheduled, and all this stuff. I mean, my apartment at the time was situated literally like across across the avenue from the bar where all the parties took place, 3 blocks away from Marvel, and around the corner from the restaurant where we were meeting with Joey Squid. So before we had that second dinner, Jimmy comes in from Brooklyn, and we're sitting in my apartment, and we're just strategizing on what we're going to say. And over that time period, we knew that we were going to Daredevil. We had to have Daredevil. It was super important. If there was no Daredevil, there's no deal. Because we felt strongly about the character. Same thing with Black Panther, right? We just felt these were untapped. Aside from a few great Daredevil stories here and there, there's a lot of untapped potential in the character. And in Black Panther, and Punisher was a Jimmy favorite, because he worked on that book for a long time as an inker. And Inhumans was something that we just remembered fondly from the Kirby era. We just loved the look of those characters. Weren't quite sure what to do with them, but we thought, why not, right? Nobody's doing anything with them. And the other thing is that we knew Marvel wasn't going to give us Spider-Man or any of the top tier characters. They'd just gone through the whole Heroes Reborn thing with the Image guys, but they weren't going to do that, and which was fine with us, because we're like, you know what? If we could make Daredevil really successful, that says a lot more than selling a lot of Spider-Man, which is already successful. So as we prepped for the dinner and exactly what we're going to ask for, I said, okay, so. But we're not going to ask for these 4 titles. And so he's like, what? I said, no, we're going to ask for the whole thing. I said, what? I'm like, yeah, we're just going. When he asks us what we want to do, we're just going to say, it's easy. Make us co-editor in chiefs, and we'll fix the whole line, the whole damn thing. Just make us co-editor. And Jimmy starts laughing. I'm like, I know he's not going to give it to us, but then when we ask for 4 titles, that'll seem a lot more manageable, right? So we laughed a lot about it. Then we went to the dinner. And we're sitting there with Joe, and Joe's like, all right, so what do you guys want to do? And I said, I gave him the whole spiel, make us co-editor in chiefs, and we'll fix the whole thing. And Joe starts laughing, and he says, how about if I give you 4 titles? We didn't even have to offer it. So he already had 4 titles in his head anyway, right? So he understood the joke. And then we just asked for, the characters, and they agreed to them. So it came through a recommendation from Gareb. He said, you should talk to these guys. But what people forget, or don't remember, is that when Jimmy and I got the Marvel Knights packaging deal, Chaos Comics, Brian Pulido and Chaos Comics, who were red hot, right? And, before the crash, they got a package deal too. So they had a deal and we had a deal. But nobody remembers that from back in the day.
Did his stuff come out?
It did. Yeah. Wow. Check it out. Yeah.
Yeah.
I forget what their imprint was called, but they had an imprint too. Yeah. So right. See, I all of a sudden like, oh, what?
Yeah. You're making us look bad with this, Joe.
No, listen. It's not only you. People just don't remember, right? And it's what is that? The Mandela effect or whatever?
Exactly.
No, this actually happened. And because Gareb had recommended Brian as well, because Brian, who is a better guerrilla marketer than Brian Pulido at that time, right? The guy was a beast, right? Selling, early Lady Death. He was just, and by the way, he keeps it up today. He was just doing his, his crowdfunding stuff. He's legendary at that stuff. He's a great salesman. So that happened during that time too.
I need to stack his characters up against yours.
Hang on. I just remembered there was one, and there was a 3rd imprint that was launched, and this was given to a letterer in the Marvel bullpen who pitched an imprint based upon the robotic tech characters, and that was called the M-Tech line. That didn't last very long either, but that was all around the same period that Marvel was trying these different imprints. And Marvel Knights is the one that sort of, survived.
That poor letterer got no juice in those pages of Wizard Magazine, man.
None. Nobody could figure out how that deal happened, to be honest with you, but it did. So.
Guy in a bullpen sounds like right place, right time, maybe.
Martin Goodman's great-grandson or some shit.
So, Joe, by all accounts, your ascension to editor-in-chief, I feel like, has been tremendously successful. Was there a mandate when you showed up? Was there a mission statement that either you had or Marvel kind of had for you in that role in the first, couple years?
Yeah, let's not go out of business. That was basically it. I mean, I'll be honest with you. When Bill Jemis offered me the job as editor in chief, my immediate knee-jerk reaction was to say no for a couple of reasons. One was I would be pulled out of Marvel Knights, right? So essentially, they're hiring me away from my own company, because Marvel Knights was a separate imprint run by Event Comics, right? Event Comics was getting paid. I wasn't a staff member.
Yeah, that's a fascinating little piece that I don't think very many people know, that as Event Comics, you were like the complete packagers. It was not just a gig at Marvel Comics.
No, I mean, it may have seemed that way because we offered to move into the offices, because we had known, again, this is the role modeling aspect, right? We were freelancers. Jimmy and I were freelancers, and then had our own company event when Image was doing the Heroes Reborn thing. So we would talk to Marvel editors and hear how they were all fearing that their jobs were on the line, that they were going to be fired soon. There was a lot of insecurity because of that Image stuff going on. And also for the business folks at Marvel, some of that Image stuff was coming in really late, and there was a lot of bad blood there. And talking to one of the business heads at Marvel, a lot of that came out of the distance, right? They were in LA, Marvel was in New York. And so that distance was causing, in between that distance was insecurity from both parties, right? Image didn't trust Marvel, Marvel didn't trust Image, and so on. So as Jimmy and I discussed this deal, and I should have mentioned that with our meeting with Calamari, we asked for 4 titles, and we said, look, just to make life easier, give us office space at Marvel. We will work and do these books at Marvel, and we will become part of the family, so that everyone can see that we are part of the family. We're all trying to dig out of this thing together. And they did. They gave us this wonderful office space at the top of the building, and we worked at it there. And it wasn't quite, wine and roses in the very beginning, until we threw a pizza party, and then things changed. But yeah, so we were not a part of Marvel. We would get paid as a packager on delivery of a book. Here's a Daredevil issue. Here's a check, right? And the other thing that we asked for, we actually forced guardrails upon ourselves. And we said, we want to go through everything that a Marvel editor has to do to get a book approved and a script approved. We need to go through that same gauntlet, so that no one in Marvel could say that we were getting preferential treatment. So we did. We had to run through every gauntlet, plus they added a few more. So we had to go even through more stringent sort of quality assurance kind of things than a regular Marvel editor had to go through.
Joe, and that Punisher book still got through with the Death Angel gimmick? No, I'm just fucking with you.
It's interesting that Event is a separate entity, and it brings me to a question that I've heard a lot over the last maybe as long as I've been a comics reader, and that's the idea of Marvel. Do you ever see Marvel licensing out its entire comic book production, sort of like they did with Event, but on a wider scale? Is that something that comes up that you guys talk about?
Well, first of all, you're asking me to divulge sort of insider information, right? No, that is strictly internet rumor garbage. It really is. It's don't believe the hype. Don't believe. Can I just say this? And I've said it many, many times before, and I'll say it on your show. Not that it makes a difference or it'll help. I have been involved in just about every aspect of the entertainment business, in one way or another. I have never met an industry as a whole that is more just more elated to predict its own demise year after year after year. Do you know how long I've been hearing comics are over, comics are dead, nobody's buying comics anymore? Now listen, there was a time, right? There was a time when the bubble collapsed where you could say that and it was a general concern. But after that, it has never been a concern. It is not an issue. The industry is not going out of business. Are there comics that maybe you don't like as an older reader because they're meant for a younger? Probably. But so what? The industry moves on, right? It moves on and moves on. When I came in as editor-in-chief, there were a lot of old readers who hated these new Marvel comics. Hell, there was a prominent creator who hated these new Marvel comics, this new style of storytelling. Wasn't his kind of comics, but they sold like crazy, right? Because we had an audience out there that wanted those new comics. And back to your question about the mandate, like I said, the mandate was, let's not go out of business. How do we rebuild this thing, right? And when I was offered the job, my immediate instinct was to say no, because I'd be hired away from my company, and would I be taking the best seat on the Titanic and be known as the last editor-in-chief who put Marvel out of business? And I remember talking to my wife that weekend about it and telling her exactly this. I said, it's the best seat on the Titanic. And she said, it may be, but if you don't take it, who does? And better the devil you know, right? She said, you've built things, rebuilt things, you've done this. Go for it, and that was it. That's all I needed to hear. And so that's what we started to do.
Let's talk about some of that sexy stuff that you did, man, by bringing in like fresh creators who had some juice on that indie circuit, man. The lowlife guy, Ed Brubaker, is going to become like one of the more prominent Marvel writers. Like, are you kidding me? Like, who could foresee that in the Magic 8 Ball? Brian Michael Bendis, David Mack,
Mike Allred,
Eric Shanower was doing stuff on the indie.
Richard Corbin.
Yeah.
Richard Corbin, goddammit, that might be Axel, but if you want to take credit, you can take credit. But maybe
But
Axel.
listen, a lot. We poached Axel from DC. I knew he was the best editor they had, right? So you look. Part of the goal of being in charge of, at least the way I see it, of being in charge of any business unit, especially a creative one, is to, you got to be able to check your ego and insecurities at the door, and hire people that are much more talented than you, because they'll ultimately make you look good in the end, right? So hire great writers to write great stories, right? And hire great editors to guide great writers. Axel is a tremendous story editor. And the fact that he had, have Corbin, do a gig for us, the one part of this that I could take credit for was say, yeah, get him, right? Because, somebody else may have said, it's not going to sell. But Corbin brought a whole different dimension, right? Because he's Richard Corbin. But with respect to Ed Brubaker, I do want to correct him. Ed was working at DC. He was doing some great work at DC. But when he came to Marvel, the view on Ed was, well, this guy, he's a crime guy, right? He writes crime noir. He's going to do what on Captain? How's he going to possibly write Captain America? I don't think there's been a better Captain America ever written than Ed Brubaker. I mean, Brubaker's knowledge of writing, his structure, his ability to tell so much in so little, right? That talent of brevity is spectacular. I mean, he is truly one of the best pure writers in the comic industry. He doesn't write a bad story, ever, right? It may not, some things may be more commercial than others, but there's no such thing as a bad Ed Brubaker story.
Joe, one of the things we were looking into, kind of prepping to talk to you, is what exactly you do these days in regards to the comic book side of Marvel. Can you give us an overview of that?
I do this. I just talk to people about what I used to do. No, I mean, look, I the thing about once I left the position as editor-in-chief, just about everything that I was working on was stuff that was behind the scenes and long lead stuff, right? Whether it was our movie division, our television division, our publishing division. I sit there in big story meetings and we come up with concepts, but they're, even if it's my idea, it's something that's going to be, it's going to be created by another writer, right? So I'm kind of see myself as a plumber in a lot of ways, right? We got a leak. How do we fix this, right? So, I'm still at the big story meetings. I'm at all our editorial meetings. I am working on some projects that I tease here and there, but they're long leads. So eventually there'll be something by me out there, and I'm working with some of my favorite people. So I'm doing stuff. I also adhere to the old adage of never talk about something until it's actually a real thing. And that comes from back in my music days, where I was told by one of my managers at the time that, don't talk about a record deal unless you signed a record deal. Don't talk about the big gig unless you signed that contract for the big gig. Because if it falls through, people not knowledgeable with the music business and how things fall through on a minute by minute basis, they don't view it as like, it's the music business. They view you as, you're a loser. You didn't get the deal, right? They'll view it negatively. So I try to keep anything that I have that's percolating, brewing, on the cusp of being announced to myself until it's actually a thing. Once it's a thing, then I'll talk your ears off about it. But up until then, I try to keep it close to the vest.
Just digging deeper into comics, like with this YouTube channel and making the discoveries that we have beyond just like the standard fanboy part of it, man, making sure that you don't let the cat out of the bag too early is a good thing, in as much as it staves off the anticipation for the inevitable letdown. If it's too long of a lead time, people start to get ideas in their head about what the thing will be, and ultimately will never deliver on that. So when you present that Batman killing joke, yeah, it's okay, but whatever, man, or Camelot 3000, like that kind of stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's 10 times truer today, with social media and the fact that stuff just gets, even if it's not spoiled, if you talk about it too early, by the time it's released or dropped, fandom will feel like they've experienced it already, and they've, like you said, they've created their own stories about what it's going to be, what it should be. Instead of just announcing and letting the product speak for itself.
Joe Q, are you telling us that when the Miracle Man gimmick comes out, man, you're going to come back and chat with us? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe.
You see what I did there?
I see what you did there.
It was a good poster.
Yeah. I know nothing.
I also wanted to ask you about one of my favorite artists I have seen come up quite a bit in influences on you, and that is Alex Toth.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could talk about how Alex Toth got on your radar, what you take from his work, and just any thoughts on Alex Toth.
Well, Alex Toth was on my radar long before I knew who Alex Toth was, right? As a kid watching Saturday morning cartoons and seeing all that stuff. And I remember as I started to break into the industry and I was drawing Ninjak, and I had a buddy who was really tight with Alex Toth, right? And by the way, so now as let me preface this. So I got started rereading comics, right, at a later age, right? So I didn't read them through childhood to adulthood, right? Somewhere, in my mid-20s, I started getting reintroduced to comics. So I started to hear about this guy, Alex Toth. So I'm learning, like, I didn't know who Neil Adams was, right? I had to learn all this stuff. I missed a whole period there, right? I knew Kirby and those cats around that time. And then when I dropped them, I missed out on a whole generation of creators. So I was re-educating myself or educating myself on these guys. So Toth was amongst them. And I was just blown away, right? By again, the brevity of line, the ability to convey so much in so little. And I fell in love with this stuff. And then I have a friend of mine, became friends with someone who was tight with Toth. And he's like, I could send Toth your artwork and he'll review it.
Uh-oh.
Like, get out of here. He's like, no, I can't. So he'd sent some Ninjak stuff of mine. And he had sent some Madmen from Mike Allred, right? And Allred got his review. I didn't see it. My buddy told me. He's like, man, Toth, he loved Allred, just loved it, right? And you can see, right, that there is a genetic connection right there, right, stylistically in the brevity line. I said, and he's like, oh, hated your stuff, hated it. I'm like, really? What? And so he read me kind of like a little critique that Toth had written, and it's overworked. And I look back on that Ninjak stuff, and I'm like, yeah, he was right. He was right. While I still felt like I kind of understood what I was doing storytelling wise, it was a different time for superhero comics, right? If you wanted to make the big bucks, you had to go over the top. That was not Toth's style, right? Toth was classic. And that was the only way to do it. So, but I appreciated the teardown. Again, you gotta. That's part of this business too. If you can't take the teardown, then you ain't ever gonna grow or expand or really become, have any modicum of success that is long lasting. You may have a flash in the pan, but that long lasting stuff, that only comes with growth.
Do you draw much? I know you're teasing a potential piece of work. I remember seeing some pages in some Hollywood flicks and things like this.
All the
And
time.
do you do reps at the board or the Wacom tablet, the Cintiq, as it were?
Yeah, it's mostly Wacom these days. Every day you got to draw every day, and I write every day. That this is the thing. When when I talk to young writers and artists, there's always that connection. There's always that question: what do I have to do to become a professional writer? What do I have to do to become a professional artist? You got to do it every day, right? Because if a kid asks me, I used to play baseball, love baseball. And if a kid asks me, what do I need to do to become a professional baseball player? I'm like, I'm not a professional baseball player, but I know what you got to do, right? You got to be at the cages every day. You got to do fielding drills every day. You got to play every day in order to reach, and then hopefully have a modicum of skills you were born with that can then take you to the next level. But just having the skills does not get you there, right? You got to go every day. If you're a basketball, you got to shoot those shots in the gym every day. It's the same thing with drawing. If you don't draw every day, even if it's just 10 minutes, then number one, you don't have the desire to do it, really, the inherent desire that it takes to become a professional. And you won't get there. You won't. Maybe you'll be a flash in the pan you'll have because you'll have a particular style that people like. But if you don't do it every day, you're just not. And the other thing is, as you become a professional, if you don't do it every day, you lose it. There's no question. It's a muscle memory thing. And the same thing with writing. If you want to be a writer, writers write. They don't talk about writing. They write. Even if it's 10 minutes of writing a day, even if it's just a journal entry, if you don't write every day, then you're not doing it right. And you don't want it bad enough.
In one of those earliest Wizard magazines that I got my hand on, issue 37 to be exact, the Rob Liefeld comeback issue, there is an Event Comics, Jimmy Palmiotti, Joe Quesada, Event Comics, like Ash piece that's in there. And that thing was super important to me because I get to see how Joe and Jimmy like lay out an issue. And I get to see these thumbnails on Post-it notes that are super tight, even though they're so small, blown up to the bigger pencils. And since you're working digitally, is there? Do you retain some of that kind of early process? Like walk us through a page or whatever. Do you work on your page in spreads or one page at a time? Like how does this part of the gimmick work?
Yeah. So in the past, right? And again, this comes from that whole role modeling thing, right? When I met Neil Adams for the first time, he showed me his process, and his process was you would do a thumbnail, like a postage stamp thumbnail, a little bit bigger than a postage stamp, right? And then you would Xerox that up, and you would Xerox it up to actual printed page size. And then you start really adding your detail, right? In pencil, you just light box and you start adding your detail into that and the important reason to see it at that size, your storytelling page, is because that's what the reader's going to see, right? When your product is produced, it's going to be that big. And because now when you start working in actual page size, right, which is much larger, right? It's 1.5 times up or whatever. Your field of vision as you're working, if you laid out a page at this size, your field of vision can only take in half of that page at one time, right? Unless you're literally working like that, right? So Neil had this methodology. So I adopted that, and I found it really interesting and really effective for my own work. And to the point where I had to buy my own Xerox machine because it was just the trips to the copy place were insane. So I had this tiny studio apartment in New York City that was taken up by probably the majority by this big Xerox machine. But it paid off because then also if you wanted to, oh man, that figure looks too small, you could Xerox it up and, and do paste mechanical. And then again, light boxing was a big part of my routine. Now that I'm digital, I'm able to, just shrink stuff down and, do the layouts in that way. In terms of like my storytelling stuff, I there are times where I will roughly lay out an entire issue. But I've found that these days I like roughly laying out scenes, just so I know how a scene plays out versus, just the entire issue. But I don't like to do one page at a time. I try to avoid that because I think it adds a certain staccato to the storytelling that isn't really conducive to flow. But in terms of the one downfall that I discovered with working digitally is blowing stuff up to add detail and realizing I didn't need to blow this thing that far up. So, and I was trying to find a cure for that, right? Do I lock the page at a size? And it took me a while to realize, oh, I know what I could do. Just never, my actual pen diameter, never go beyond this, any less than this.
What
right?
number is that, man? I always hear 10 is the magic number. 10 pixels.
I go 15, sometimes 10. If it's a background figure, I'll go 10, but it's usually 15 for me. And that'll give me, sometimes that richness of stroke with the 15, because, I do 1 to 15, right? So it's thick to thin or thin to thick, whatever. Sometimes if you're working on some background stuff, it just gets a little too messy for me. So I'll drop down to a 10, sometimes a 7. But, I was doing stuff where I was down to like a 4 and a 3. Hold on 1 second, folks.
What kind of exciting stuff is forthcoming from Marvel Comics? One thing we're super stoked on is that JR Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah, having JR come back, man, it's just phenomenal, right? It's like Kirby returning. The guy's a legacy. He's just been a genius storyteller his whole life, and having him back on Spider-Man, that's a really fun book, by the way, too. I can tell you that much. But there's a ton of stuff cooking, and again, I don't like tipping stuff off, because here's the thing, when I was editor in chief and people would leak my stuff, it would just drive me nuts, because it's the stuff in my department, right? I don't need you. And that's why, if people ask me about the movies, they ask me about the TV shows back in the day, I don't like talking about that stuff, because, those divisions are run by other people. And I just happen to have the benefit of intermingling with all these different divisions. So it's not my place. So C.V. Cebulski's our editor in chief, so he's the hype man these days. All I can tell you is that, we have our big story conferences. We have some cool stuff coming up, and he's just keeping the flame alive, man.
One of the correct answers was Hulk Grand Design is coming out in March, and
all right.
Joe, we should
have seeded that. You should have sent me the note.
we have a mouthpiece here by way of this channel, 50,000 plus people. What can we do to sell this book and get 100,000 copies in circulation, man? Give us some scoop, man. We have some ideas naturally, but you're a salesman. What can we do to get this thing up there?
Listen, just keep doing what you're doing. You just got to get out there and shake hands, kiss babies, and talk about it. But ultimately, at the same time, Marvel's got its own marketing machinery, right? So they're going to say to you, this is what we're doing to market it, and they'll ask things of you. But ultimately, as creators, the best you could do is go out there and just talk about the product. Talk about, maybe set yourself on fire. I don't know. That seems counterproductive, but hell, it will get you a lot of attention, right?
Just do it with your non-dominant hand.
I don't know if I'm that dedicated, but
you could say something stupid on the internet. I wouldn't recommend it at all. Right?
The Mark Miller philosophy.
Mark just doesn't say stupid things. He says outrageous things.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah. I mean, Mark is a great salesman, right? He's a great salesman. He loves to stoke the fire from that old Marvel tradition back then. We were doing the Ultimate books. But that's the kind of thing, right? I mean, but the other thing is, and no disrespect to you or me, none of us are Mark Miller, right? We don't have quite the following that he does, right? So when he says something like that, there's a lot of more people paying attention to it. But the goal is to get to that plateau, correct? So the only thing I can tell you is just keep talking about it, man. It's the only way to do it. And then the book will rise or fall based upon the quality of the product itself, because ultimately, there's a collector's market up there, but what you want is readers, you want eyeballs, you want people to love your story, because then they want the next one. If it's just a flash in the pan product, a collector's thing, it's unsustainable.
So Joe, drop some social media contacts, that kind of thing. If you have Instagram, Twitter, whatnot, and we could get the heck out of here, man. We know you're a busy man.
Yeah. So yeah. I mean, I'm Joe Quesada on Twitter. I'm Joe Quesada on Instagram. I think I'm Joe Quesada. I don't use Instagram as much as I should. And I'm on Facebook as well. Same name. Hang on, let me just check my Instagram. When am I on my Instagram? Shows you how much I know. Yeah, I'm Joe Quesada on Instagram. There you go. So.
And worth noting for people who haven't been following you, you do post a lot of artwork. So if you're a fan of
I do.
art, you can follow to see some of that art popping up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let you guys. I don't post on social as much as I used to because, again, much like Legends of Zelda. See how I just did that? See that callback? Whoa, all the way back to the beginning. It's a time suck, and it's a rabbit hole that I see creators get into, and sometimes they can't get out of it because, it's that endorphin rush of people saying, "Oh, love your stuff." But here's a little bit of advice I'll leave you guys with, in terms of like social media. Social media is not the real world, right? Thousands upon thousands of people liking what you said or liking what you've posted does not mean that they are going to the register, reaching into their wallet and taking out their hard-earned money to buy your product. It just means they liked it for free. And so so I often find that, I don't know if my posting every day on social media is going to get me a single extra sale. Maybe I should take that time to make my product the best it possibly can be and post whenever, I've got something important to say. But I understand that the endorphin rush, because, we work, most creators are working at home, and that endorphin rush of posting something and having fans go, "We love it," is great. But I can't tell you how many people I see in the industry who have hundreds of thousands of followers and can't sell more than 10,000 books, right? And so it's and that's not a slight to them. It's just a warning that it's not the real world. It's not actual sales. It's not feet walking into a store saying, "Hey, I want to buy the next book by so and so because, man, I love that other book so much." It's just people on a keyboard saying, "Cool."
That's all. Takes a half a second, which is the reason why I like having this YouTube channel. And when you take a look at the metrics, people stick with us for about 45 minutes whenever they come kick it.
Yes. Again, right. It's if the number is, if you got a sustainable number, that's great. That means people are interested in what it is that you guys are providing, right? And with brilliant guests to provide that content. But yeah, I often see creators getting caught up in the whole internet stuff of it all, right? And it's just, it serves its purpose, but it can be counterproductive if you spend all day on it. I'm floored at how anybody gets any work done when they're posting 20, 30 times a day. Just unbelievable to me. So I post when I got something that I feel, this is gonna be fun to post, but I try not to make it an addiction because I know how that goes.
Joe, super cool, man. Thanks so much for your time.
Yes.
Get back to business, man. Thanks for swinging by Cartoonist Kayfabe. And once again, when that Miracle Man comes out, do come back. Bring Neil. Bring Uncle Neil. He's coming to town in May. We'll get him to come talk about it. And let's do it again, man.
All right, brothers. Take care. And good luck with the show and keep it going, man. Keep it safe.
Thanks so much.
All right.